Have you ever tried to talk to someone about spirituality, but they just won't listen? It's frustrating, right? But what if I told you there's a way to change their mind that actually works? In this video, I'll show you how to help others see spirituality in a new light without pushing them away. This isn't just some trick or technique. It's a whole new way of connecting with people that can transform your relationships and maybe even the world around you. Now, you might be thinking, why should I care about changing someone's mind? Can't I just let them believe what they want? Well, here's the thing. If we don't learn how to talk about spirituality the right way, we might end up pushing people away from it forever. And that's a big deal. Think about it. How many times have you seen someone roll their eyes when spirituality comes up? Or maybe you've been that person yourself. The problem is, when we don't know how to share our spiritual ideas, we can come across as pushy, weird, or just plain annoying. And that doesn't help anyone. This isn't just about winning an argument or being right. It's about something much bigger and more important. It's about connecting with others on a deep level and helping them grow. When we learn how to change minds about spirituality, we're not just swapping out one set of beliefs for another. We're opening up whole new worlds of possibility for people. We're helping them see life in a richer, more meaningful way. And that can have a huge impact on their happiness, their relationships, and even how they treat the planet. But here's the catch. If we go about it the wrong way, we can do more harm than good. Push too hard, and people will just shut down. They'll build up walls and become even more resistant to spiritual ideas. That's why it's so crucial to learn the right approach. When you know how to change minds effectively, you can help people open up to new ideas without feeling threatened or defensive. You can plant seeds that might grow into something beautiful over time. So, what exactly are we going to talk about in this video? Well, I'm going to share with you 5 simple steps that can help you change someone's mind about spirituality. These aren't complicated tricks or manipulative tactics. They're straightforward, honest ways of connecting with people and helping them see things from a new perspective. First, we'll talk about how to really understand where the other person is coming from. This is so important because if you don't get their point of view, you'll never be able to help them see yours. Then we'll look at how to find common ground, those shared experiences or values that can bridge the gap between different beliefs. Next, we'll explore the power of sharing your own experiences. There's something special that happens when we open up and tell our own stories. It can touch people in a way that facts and arguments never can. After that, we'll dive into the art of asking good questions. You'd be amazed at how the right question can open up a whole new way of thinking. We'll also talk about respecting boundaries. This is crucial because pushing too hard can backfire and make people even more closed off. I'll show you how to recognize when someone needs space and how to keep the door open for future conversations. But that's not all. I've got something special to share with you, a powerful listening exercise that has helped me connect with even the most skeptical people. It's a simple technique, but it can work wonders in helping you really hear what others are saying and showing them that you genuinely care about their perspective. Throughout the video, I'll be sharing real-life examples and stories to illustrate these points. You'll see how these ideas play out in actual conversations and relationships. And don't worry, I'll keep everything clear and easy to understand. We're not going to get bogged down in complicated theories or hard-to-grasp concepts. This is practical, down-to-earth stuff that you can start using right away. Now, I want to be clear about something. The goal here isn't to make everyone believe exactly what you believe. That's not what changing minds is really about. Instead, it's about opening up conversations, fostering understanding, and helping people explore new ideas. Sometimes, the mind you end up changing might even be your own. So, are you ready to learn how to talk about spirituality in a way that actually gets through to people? Are you excited to discover how you can make a real difference in the lives of your friends, family, and maybe even strangers? Great! Let's dive in and explore these powerful techniques for changing minds and opening hearts. Let's start with the first and maybe most important step, really understanding where the other person is coming from. This might sound simple, but it's actually pretty rare. Most of the time, when we're trying to change someone's mind, we're so focused on what we want to say that we don't really listen to them. But here's the thing. If you don't understand their point of view, you'll never be able to help them see yours. So, how do you really understand someone? It starts with listening, not just hearing the words they're saying, but really trying to get inside their head and heart. When someone is talking about their beliefs or lack of belief in spirituality, try to put aside your own thoughts for a moment. Don't worry about coming up with counter-arguments or thinking about what you're going to say next. Just focus on them. Listen to the words they're using. Pay attention to their tone of voice and body language. Try to pick up on the emotions behind what they're saying. Are they frustrated? Curious? Afraid? Understanding these emotions can give you valuable clues about why they believe what they believe. Here's a trick that can help. Try to summarize what they're saying in your own words. You might say something like, "So, it sounds like you're saying," and then repeat back what you think they meant. This does two important things. First, it helps you make sure you've really understood them. Second, it shows them that you're genuinely listening and trying to understand. That alone can make a huge difference in how open they are to hearing your ideas. Now, here's where a lot of people go wrong. They judge. It's so easy to fall into the trap of thinking, "That's ridiculous," or "How could anyone believe that?" when you hear something you disagree with. But the moment you start judging, you stop understanding. And if you stop understanding, you've lost any chance of changing their mind. Instead, try to approach their beliefs with curiosity. Ask yourself, how did they come to believe this? What experiences might have led them to this conclusion? Even if you completely disagree with what they're saying, there's usually some reason behind it. Maybe they had a bad experience with religion in the past. Maybe they've never been exposed to spiritual ideas before. Or maybe they've thought long and hard about these issues and come to their own conclusions. Understanding doesn't mean agreeing. You can totally get where someone is coming from without thinking they're right. But when you make the effort to understand, you create a foundation of respect and openness. And that's essential if you want to have any hope of changing their mind. Let me give you an example. I once had a friend who was really against anything spiritual. Whenever the topic came up, he'd get really dismissive and even a bit angry. At first, I kept trying to argue with him to prove that spirituality was important, but it just made him more resistant. Then one day, I decided to try a different approach. Instead of arguing, I just asked him to tell me more about why he felt that way. And I really listened, without interrupting or trying to change his mind. It turned out that he had grown up in a really strict religious household where spirituality was used as a way to control and punish him. No wonder he was so against it. Once I understood where he was coming from, I was able to have a much more meaningful conversation with him. I could acknowledge his experiences and show him that I wasn't trying to push him into anything like what he'd been through before. It opened up a whole new level of trust between us. So, next time you're talking to someone about spirituality and you feel that urge to jump in and correct them or argue with them, take a deep breath. Remind yourself to listen first. Try to really get what they're saying and why they're saying it. It might not change their mind right away, but it creates the space where change becomes possible. Now that we've talked about understanding the other person, let's move on to the next crucial step, finding common ground. This is where things start to get really interesting, because even people with very different beliefs often have more in common than they realize. And when you can find those areas of agreement, it becomes much easier to open up conversations about spirituality. So, what do I mean by common ground? Well, it could be shared values, similar experiences, or even just common interests. The key is to look for those points of connection that can serve as a bridge between your different perspectives. Let's start with values. Even if someone doesn't believe in spirituality, they probably care about things like love, compassion, honesty, or personal growth. These are values that are often associated with spiritual practices, but they're also just fundamental human values. When you can identify these shared values, you create a foundation for deeper conversations. For example, let's say you're talking to someone who's very skeptical about spirituality, but you know they're passionate about environmental issues. You might say something like, one of the things I love about my spiritual practice is that it really emphasizes our connection to the earth and the importance of taking care of our planet. It sounds like that's something that's really important to you too. Suddenly, you found a point of connection that can lead to a more open discussion. Shared experiences can also be powerful common ground. Maybe you've both gone through tough times and found ways to cope. Or perhaps you've both had moments of awe when looking at a beautiful sunset or holding a newborn baby. These kinds of experiences often touch on spiritual themes, even if the other person doesn't label them that way. I remember talking to a friend who was a hardcore atheist. He was always quick to dismiss anything spiritual. But one day, we were hiking in the mountains, and we reached this incredible viewpoint. The view was just breathtaking, and for a moment, we both just stood there in silence, taking it all in. After a while, he said, moments like this make me feel like there might be something more to life after all. It wasn't a dramatic conversion or anything, but it opened up a whole new area of conversation between us. Now, finding common ground doesn't mean ignoring your differences. It's not about pretending you believe the same things. Instead, it's about recognizing that beneath our different beliefs and perspectives, we often share common hopes, fears, and experiences. When you can tap into that shared humanity, it becomes much easier to have meaningful conversations about deeper topics. Here's a practical tip. When you're trying to find common ground, ask questions. Be genuinely curious about the other person's experiences and values. You might ask things like, "What's the most awe-inspiring thing you've ever experienced?" Or, "What do you think gives life meaning?" These kinds of questions can reveal surprising areas of agreement. Another approach is to share your own experiences in a way that invites connection. Instead of saying, "My spiritual practice teaches me to be compassionate," you might say, "I've found that focusing on compassion really helps me feel more connected to others." Have you ever had experiences like that? This invites the other person to share their own similar experiences, even if they don't frame them in spiritual terms. Finding common ground can sometimes feel like a bit of detective work. You're looking for those little clues and connections that might not be obvious at first. But when you do find them, it's like discovering a secret passageway. Suddenly, conversations that might have been tense or awkward become more relaxed and open. Remember, the goal here isn't to trick anyone or to pretend you agree on everything. It's about creating a space of mutual understanding and respect. When you can find common ground, you're not just two people with opposing views anymore. You're two humans sharing a moment of connection. And in that space of connection, real change becomes possible. So, as you're talking to people about spirituality, keep your eyes open for those points of connection. Listen for the values they express, the experiences that have shaped them, the things that light them up. When you find that common ground, don't be afraid to point it out. You might be surprised at how quickly it can shift the entire tone of your conversation. Now that we've talked about understanding others and finding common ground, let's dive into one of the most powerful tools you have for changing minds: sharing your own experiences. There's something special that happens when we open up and tell our own stories. It can touch people in a way that facts and arguments never can. Think about it. When was the last time you changed your mind because someone threw a bunch of statistics at you? Probably not recently, right? But I bet you can remember times when someone's personal story really moved you or made you see things differently. That's because stories speak to our hearts as well as our heads. They help us connect emotionally with ideas that might otherwise seem abstract or irrelevant. When it comes to spirituality, personal stories are especially powerful. Spirituality is, at its core, about personal experience. It's about how we find meaning, how we connect with something larger than ourselves, how we navigate the big questions of life. And there's no better way to convey that than through your own authentic experiences. Now, I'm not talking about preaching or trying to convince someone that your experiences are the ultimate truth. It's more about opening up and sharing honestly about your own journey. What experiences have shaped your spiritual beliefs? How has spirituality impacted your life in practical ways? What questions or doubts have you wrestled with? Let me give you an example. I once had a coworker who was really skeptical about anything spiritual. Whenever the topic came up, he'd usually just roll his eyes or make a sarcastic comment. But one day, we were having lunch, and somehow we got onto the topic of dealing with stress. Without really thinking about it, I started telling him about how meditation had helped me during a really tough time in my life. I didn't go into any grand spiritual theories. I just told him about how overwhelmed and anxious I had been, how I couldn't sleep, how I felt like I was constantly on edge. And then I described how learning to meditate had gradually helped me find a sense of calm and perspective. I talked about the practical benefits: sleeping better, being able to focus more at work, feeling less reactive in my relationships. To my surprise, he was really interested. He asked questions about how I learned to meditate, what it felt like, whether it was hard to stick with it. It turned out that he had been struggling with stress and anxiety too, but he'd always dismissed meditation as some kind of weird spiritual thing. Hearing my personal experience made him see it in a new light. Did he suddenly become a convert to spirituality? No, not at all. But it opened up a whole new area of conversation between us. He ended up trying meditation himself and found it helpful. And more importantly, it made him more open to hearing about other aspects of spirituality that he might have dismissed before. That's the power of personal stories. They make abstract ideas concrete. They show how spirituality can be relevant to everyday life. And they create a sense of connection and trust that makes people more willing to consider new ideas. First, be honest. Don't try to make your experiences sound more dramatic or profound than they really were. People can usually tell when you're exaggerating, and it can make them skeptical of everything else you say. It's okay to talk about small, everyday experiences. Sometimes those can be the most relatable and powerful. Second, focus on the practical impacts. How has spirituality changed your life in tangible ways? Maybe it's helped you deal with stress, improved your relationships, or given you a sense of purpose. These practical benefits can be really compelling, especially for people who are skeptical of more abstract spiritual concepts. Third, don't be afraid to talk about your doubts or struggles. If you present spirituality as all sunshine and roses, it can seem unrealistic or even off-putting to someone who's skeptical. Sharing your own questions or challenges can make your story more relatable and authentic. Fourth, invite the other person to share their experiences too. After you've shared your story, you might ask, "Have you ever experienced anything like that?" Or, "What do you think about that?" This turns the conversation into a dialogue rather than a monologue. Finally, remember that timing is important. Sharing your personal experiences is most effective when the other person is open and receptive. If someone is in an argumentative mood or clearly not interested, it might be better to wait for another time. One more thing. Sharing personal stories doesn't mean you have to bare your soul to everyone you meet. It's okay to have boundaries and to share only what you're comfortable with. The key is to be authentic and to speak from your own experience rather than trying to push your beliefs onto others. Personal stories have a way of bypassing our defensive barriers. When someone shares honestly about their own experiences, it's hard to argue or dismiss it. Even if the other person doesn't agree with your conclusions, they can't deny your experience. And that opens up space for real dialogue and understanding. So, as you're talking to people about spirituality, don't be afraid to share your own story. Talk about the experiences that have shaped your beliefs, the way spirituality has impacted your life, the questions you've wrestled with. You never know. Your story might be exactly what someone needs to hear to start seeing spirituality in a new light. Now that we've explored the power of sharing our own stories, let's dive into another crucial skill for changing minds about spirituality: asking thoughtful questions. You might think that to change someone's mind, you need to have all the answers. But often, it's the questions you ask that can make the biggest difference. Good questions can do amazing things. They can open up new ways of thinking, challenge assumptions, and help people explore their own beliefs more deeply. When it comes to spirituality, asking the right questions can be even more powerful than making statements. So, what makes a good question? First, it should be open-ended. That means asking questions that can't be answered with a simple yes or no. Instead of asking, "Do you believe in God?" you might ask, "What does the idea of a higher power mean to you?" This kind of question invites reflection and deeper discussion. Another key is to ask questions that come from a place of genuine curiosity. Remember, the goal isn't to trap the other person or prove them wrong. It's to understand their perspective better and to help them explore their own thoughts and feelings. When you ask questions with real interest, people can sense that. It makes them more likely to open up and engage in meaningful conversation. What experiences in your life have shaped your views on spirituality? How do you find meaning or purpose in your life? What do you think happens after we die? How does that belief affect how you live your life? Have you ever had an experience that made you feel connected to something larger than yourself? What was that like? What role do you think spirituality or religion should play in society? These questions don't assume any particular belief. They're open-ended and invite the other person to share their own thoughts and experiences. Now, here's a trick that can be really powerful. After someone answers a question, try following up with, "That's interesting. Can you tell me more about that?" This simple phrase shows that you're really listening and interested in understanding more deeply. It often leads people to share insights they might not have thought to mention otherwise. I remember having a conversation with a friend who was adamant that spirituality was just a crutch for weak people. Instead of arguing, I asked him, "What experiences have led you to that conclusion?" His answer surprised me. He talked about seeing people use religion to avoid dealing with real-world problems. This led to a much more nuanced discussion about the difference between escapism and genuine spiritual growth. Asking questions can also help people examine their own beliefs more closely. Sometimes, people hold views they've never really thought through. By asking gentle, probing questions, you can help them explore their beliefs more deeply. You might ask something like, "How did you come to believe that?" Or, "What would it mean for you if that belief turned out not to be true?" Remember, the goal here isn't to change someone's mind on the spot. It's to open up space for reflection and dialogue. Good questions plant seeds that might grow over time. One important note: be prepared for the questions to come back to you. If you're asking someone about their beliefs, it's only fair that they might want to know about yours too. This can lead to some really rich, two-way conversations about spirituality. So, next time you're talking about spirituality, try focusing more on asking questions than on making statements. You might be surprised at how much more engaging and productive the conversation becomes. As we continue our journey in learning how to change minds about spirituality, we need to talk about something really important: respecting boundaries. This might seem counterintuitive at first. After all, if you're trying to change someone's mind, don't you need to push a little? Actually, the opposite is true. Respecting boundaries is crucial if you want to have any hope of influencing someone's views on spirituality. Here's the thing: spirituality is deeply personal. It touches on our most fundamental beliefs about life, death, meaning, and our place in the universe. When we talk about these topics, we're dealing with sensitive territory. Push too hard, and people will naturally become defensive. They'll put up walls and become even more resistant to new ideas. So, how do you respect boundaries while still trying to change minds? It starts with being attentive to the other person's comfort level. Pay attention to their body language and tone of voice. Are they leaning in, asking questions, seeming engaged? Or are they crossing their arms, looking away, giving short answers? These are clues about how open they are to the conversation. If you notice signs that someone is uncomfortable, it's important to back off a bit. You might say something like, "I hope I'm not pushing too much. I find this topic really interesting, but I know it can be personal. Let me know if you'd rather talk about something else." This shows that you respect their feelings and gives them an easy out if they need it. Sometimes, people will directly tell you they don't want to discuss spirituality. When this happens, it's crucial to respect that. You might be tempted to try just one more argument, or to insist that they hear you out. But pushing past someone's clearly stated boundaries is a surefire way to push them away from your ideas permanently. I learned this lesson the hard way once. I was talking to a coworker about meditation, something I'm really passionate about. I could tell she was a bit uncomfortable, but I kept going, thinking I just needed to explain it better. Finally, she snapped at me and told me to leave her alone. Not only did I not change her mind, but I damaged our working relationship. It took a while to rebuild the trust between us. Respecting boundaries doesn't mean giving up, though. It just means being patient and playing the long game. If someone isn't open to talking about spirituality right now, that's okay. Focus on building a positive relationship with them in other ways. Show them through your actions how your spiritual beliefs positively impact your life. Over time, they might become more curious and open to discussion. Another aspect of respecting boundaries is being okay with people believing different things. Sometimes, in our eagerness to share what we've found meaningful, we can come across as thinking our way is the only right way. But true respect means acknowledging that different people find meaning and truth in different places. You might say something like, "I know we see things differently, and that's okay. I'm just glad we can talk about these big questions together." This kind of statement can actually make people more open to hearing your perspective because they don't feel like you're trying to force your views on them. It's also important to respect people's right to their own spiritual journey. Maybe someone isn't ready to embrace spiritual ideas right now. That doesn't mean they never will be. By respecting their boundaries and giving them space, you leave the door open for future conversations. Here's a trick that can help. If you feel the urge to push or argue, take a deep breath and remind yourself of your ultimate goal. Is it to win an argument, or is it to help this person be open to spiritual ideas? Usually, backing off and respecting boundaries serves that larger goal better than pushing harder. Remember, changing someone's mind about spirituality is rarely a one-time event. It's a process that can unfold over months or even years. By respecting boundaries, you create an atmosphere of trust and openness that makes that long-term change possible. Now, I want to share with you a powerful tool that has helped me connect with even the most skeptical people when it comes to spirituality. It's called the 5-minute silent listening exercise. This might sound simple, but don't be fooled. It can be surprisingly profound. Here's how it works. When you're having a conversation about spirituality with someone, especially if it's getting a bit heated or if you feel like you're talking in circles, suggest trying this exercise. Tell them you'd like to listen to them speak about their views on spirituality for 5 full minutes without interrupting. During this time, your job is to listen deeply without planning your response or thinking about how you'll counter their points. Just listen. Set a timer for 5 minutes. The other person speaks about their views on spirituality for the full 5 minutes. You listen silently, maintaining eye contact and an open, receptive posture. No interrupting, no matter what. When the timer goes off, thank them for sharing. Now, here's the really important part. After they've spoken, don't jump in with your own views or try to counter what they've said. Instead, take a moment to reflect back what you've heard. You might say something like, "Thank you for sharing that with me. If I understood correctly, you feel that," and then summarize the main points they made. This shows that you were really listening and trying to understand. Only after you've reflected back what they said should you ask if they'd be willing to do the same for you. To listen to your views for 5 minutes without interrupting. Why is this exercise so powerful? Well, there are a few reasons. First, it creates a space for real listening. So often in conversations about spirituality, we're so focused on making our own points that we don't really hear what the other person is saying. This exercise forces us to truly listen. Second, it makes the other person feel heard and respected. When someone feels that their views have been genuinely listened to, they're much more likely to be open to hearing yours. Third, it often leads people to express things they might not have said otherwise. When someone knows they have 5 uninterrupted minutes to speak, they often go deeper than they would in normal conversation. They might share doubts, questions, or experiences that give you a much better understanding of where they're coming from. I remember using this exercise with a friend who was very anti-religion. He'd had some bad experiences with religious people in the past and was pretty closed off to anything spiritual. When I suggested the exercise, he was skeptical but agreed to try it. As he spoke, I realized there was so much more to his views than I had understood. He talked about feeling judged by religious people, about struggling with the idea of a God who would allow suffering, about feeling pressured to believe things that didn't make sense to him. By the end of the 5 minutes, I had a much deeper appreciation for his perspective. When it was my turn to speak, I found myself sharing not just my beliefs, but the doubts and questions I'd wrestled with on my own spiritual journey. I talked about how spirituality had helped me find peace and meaning, but also about times when I'd struggled with my faith. The conversation that followed was one of the most genuine and meaningful discussions about spirituality I've ever had. We didn't agree on everything, but we understood each other so much better. And my friend admitted that he was more open to spiritual ideas than he had been before. Now, I want to be clear. This exercise isn't about tricking someone into listening to you. It's about creating a space for mutual understanding. Sometimes, you might do this exercise and find that you're the one whose mind opens up to new perspectives. A few tips for making the most of this exercise. Really commit to listening without judgment. If you find your mind wandering or starting to form counter-arguments, gently bring your attention back to what the person is saying. Pay attention not just to their words, but to their tone of voice and body language. Often, these can tell you as much as the words themselves. If the person struggles to fill the full 5 minutes, it's okay. Just sit in comfortable silence until the time is up. Sometimes, the pauses can be just as meaningful as the words. After the exercise, be open to continuing the conversation if the other person wants to. Often, this exercise creates an atmosphere of openness that can lead to really meaningful dialogue. Remember, the goal here isn't to win or to change someone's mind immediately. It's to create understanding and open up the possibility for deeper conversations about spirituality. Even if the other person's views don't change right away, this kind of respectful, deep listening can plant seeds that might grow over time. So, next time you find yourself in a challenging conversation about spirituality, why not suggest trying the 5-minute silent listening exercise? You might be surprised at how it can transform the conversation and open up new possibilities for understanding and connection. Now that we've explored the power of listening and asking questions, let's talk about one of the most impactful ways to change someone's mind about spirituality: sharing your own experiences. There's something uniquely powerful about personal stories. They can touch hearts and open minds in ways that facts and arguments often can't. When it comes to spirituality, personal experiences are especially important. After all, spirituality is deeply personal. It's about how we find meaning, how we connect with something larger than ourselves, and how we navigate the big questions of life. And there's no better way to convey that than through your own authentic experiences. Now, I'm not talking about preaching or trying to convince someone that your experiences are the ultimate truth. It's more about opening up and sharing honestly about your own journey. What experiences have shaped your spiritual beliefs? How has spirituality impacted your life in practical ways? What questions or doubts have you wrestled with? Let me give you an example. I once had a coworker who was really skeptical about anything spiritual. Whenever the topic came up, he'd usually just roll his eyes or make a sarcastic comment. But one day, we were having lunch, and somehow we got onto the topic of dealing with stress. Without really thinking about it, I started telling him about how meditation had helped me during a really tough time in my life. I didn't go into any grand spiritual theories. I just told him about how overwhelmed and anxious I had been, how I couldn't sleep, how I felt like I was constantly on edge. And then I described how learning to meditate had gradually helped me find a sense of calm and perspective. I talked about the practical benefits: sleeping better, being able to focus more at work, feeling less reactive in my relationships. To my surprise, he was really interested. He asked questions about how I learned to meditate, what it felt like, whether it was hard to stick with it. It turned out that he had been struggling with stress and anxiety too, but he'd always dismissed meditation as some kind of weird spiritual thing. Hearing my personal experience made him see it in a new light. Did he suddenly become a convert to spirituality? No, not at all. But it opened up a whole new area of conversation between us. He ended up trying meditation himself and found it helpful. And more importantly, it made him more open to hearing about other aspects of spirituality that he might have dismissed before. That's the power of personal stories. They make abstract ideas concrete. They show how spirituality can be relevant to everyday life. And they create a sense of connection and trust that makes people more willing to consider new ideas. First, be honest. Don't try to make your experiences sound more dramatic or profound than they really were. People can usually tell when you're exaggerating, and it can make them skeptical of everything else you say. It's okay to talk about small, everyday experiences. Sometimes those can be the most relatable and powerful. Second, focus on the practical impacts. How has spirituality changed your life in tangible ways? Maybe it's helped you deal with stress, improved your relationships, or given you a sense of purpose. These practical benefits can be really compelling, especially for people who are skeptical of more abstract spiritual concepts. Third, don't be afraid to talk about your doubts or struggles. If you present spirituality as all sunshine and roses, it can seem unrealistic or even off-putting to someone who's skeptical. Sharing your own questions or challenges can make your story more relatable and authentic. Fourth, invite the other person to share their experiences too. After you've shared your story, you might ask, "Have you ever experienced anything like that?" Or, "What do you think about that?" This turns the conversation into a dialogue rather than a monologue. Finally, remember that timing is important. Sharing your personal experiences is most effective when the other person is open and receptive. If someone is in an argumentative mood or clearly not interested, it might be better to wait for another time. Personal stories have a way of bypassing our defensive barriers. When someone shares honestly about their own experiences, it's hard to argue or dismiss it. Even if the other person doesn't agree with your conclusions, they can't deny your experience. And that opens up space for real dialogue and understanding. So, as you're talking to people about spirituality, don't be afraid to share your own story.